Hello, my name is Michael O'Keefe, aka The Movie Wizard. If you enjoy this interview and want to hear more top-notch film industry conversations, please press the thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell to stay in the know. David Marmor, we're here today to talk about your film 1BR, but first things first, are you currently in Montreal? Did you enjoy your time in Montreal?
I am still in Montreal. We have another screening on Monday at 11:30 a.m., and so I'm going to stick around for that. And yeah, I love Montreal. I've actually been here once before. I have a very close friend who moved here about 5 years ago, so I've visited once before, and it's an amazing city. I think one of the great international cities, and I'm having a fantastic time. Although I have to confess, I have not yet had poutine on this trip.
Oh, okay. So poutine last time, but hold the poutine. You don't want to overdo the poutine.
No, I know. It's like I think once per trip is my quota.
Okay, fair enough. So how would you explain the story of 1BR to someone?
Well, I would say it's on its face, it's about a young woman who moves to Los Angeles. Very young, first time moving out on her own, and which is an experience that I think a lot of people have when they're just reaching adulthood, and she feels very isolated, very alone, as a lot of us do, and also has some particular family circumstances. She's kind of escaping from a painful past, and she finds herself in this apartment complex that at first seems like it's going to fill a lot of the sort of holes in her life, and it gives her a sense of community and belonging. But as she moves in, she starts to have a sense that there might not be something quite right with some of her neighbors, one in particular who starts to creep her out. And she, there start to be problems with the apartment itself, that she has trouble sleeping and there are strange noises, and it just becomes more and more upsetting to her. And then something happens, which I don't want to reveal because it's, I think some of the pleasure is in the surprise of it, but it goes off in a bit of a different direction, but still kind of explores the themes that I hope anyway that are laid out at the beginning with the ideas of sort of isolation and loneliness versus community.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to tiptoe around what you're talking about. So, but I will.
Yeah, it's a little difficult.
Yeah, I will try my best though. So the actors definitely get weird in this movie. Some of them are very disturbing, I would say. How did you
Yes.
cast this movie? Where did you find these actors?
Well, most of these actors are Los Angeles based, although a couple of the central cast are not. I mean, the world we live in today, you can kind of cast from all over. So our lead actress, Nicole Bryden-Bloom, who plays Sarah, is based in New York, and she put herself on tape for us. And so we were watching her remotely from Los Angeles, where I'm based. And then Giles Matty, who plays Brian, who's another one of the major characters, is British. He's based in London, although you would never know it because he does a flawless American accent. And then most of the rest of the cast were local hires, LA based, and with something like this, where we're an independent production, you don't have necessarily access to big name stars. It actually, to my mind, it's very freeing because you really can cast purely on merit. Just cast the people who you think are absolutely the best for the role and the best actors. And so a couple of the key roles were filled by friends of mine who I've done theater with for years. I was for years part of a repertory company, a Shakespearean repertory company in Los Angeles called Theatricum Botanicum. And so Sarah's father is played by Alan Blumenfeld, who is a dear friend of mine from my theater days, and is also an amazingly accomplished actor. And then Ernestine Phillips, who plays Esther, who's another sort of key member of the apartment community, is another good friend of mine from my Theatricum days. So it's nice. It feels in a way like you are sort of reuniting. We were reuniting a little bit of a community of our own in the casting. And I'll just say one other thing about the casting, which is that we got so lucky with Nicole because of the kind of schedule we were under. Did not allow for a lot of time. You know, we couldn't do 10 takes of anything. We couldn't even really do 5 takes of anything. And I mean, if you've seen the movie, she is so good and so powerful, and goes to such a dark place and such an intense place. And she just was such a pleasure to work with. She could get there, you know, we would talk about what we were going for, and she would get it immediately, and she would get there immediately. And it was like magic watching her. I don't know how she did it, but if she hadn't, I don't know that we would have actually been able to finish the movie.
Jeez Louise. So what were some cinematic, and maybe not even cinematic, but just kind of, what was influencing you at the time when you were working on this, or right before you decided you want to do this? What were you watching? What was in the air? You know, what were you listening to? What were you reading? What was going on with you?
Well, I'll say, I mean, there are several phases. You know, a project like this almost always forms over years, and that was certainly the case in this instance. When I first conceived the script, it was very much, this will sound very weird, but it was very much autobiographical. I had moved to Los Angeles alone, you know, in my early 20s, and I moved into an apartment building that's quite similar to the one that ended up in the movie. And, you know, things didn't turn out, obviously, as they do
I'd hope not.
in the movie, but it did sort of get me thinking. I felt very alienated in Los Angeles. I felt very lonely. It's a vast city where it's hard to get to know people. It's hard to have a sense of community. So that sort of started the wheels turning on that idea for me. And that also, you know, I think led me to watching a lot of movies that were, you know, that ended up being influences. And I would say major ones included, you know, an obvious reference would be Rosemary's Baby, which, you know, is a somewhat similar premise, although, you know, sort of the emphasis and where the story plays out. I like to say that sort of like our story kind of picks up where Rosemary's Baby is ending in some way. But I mean, actually, Polanski's entire apartment trilogy, as it's called, was somewhat of an influence. I would say Rosemary's Baby is my favorite of them, but Repulsion and The Tenant are both, you know, both really explore similar themes. Although, you know, of course, now I feel guilty because Polanski is very problematic. But those movies are still very powerful. And then another sort of major tonal influence was Aronofsky's Black Swan, which I think is just a brilliant movie. It's my favorite of his movies. And what I really took from that was the subjectivity of it. That is a movie that almost entirely takes place from Nina's point of view. And that was what I wanted for this as well. The way things play out and what the movie is about, I felt like it was really important that we be with Sarah, close on Sarah, sort of feeling what she's feeling the entire time. And so that was sort of a major tonal influence on me. And then I would say like the final one and a little bit more minor one was The Shining, which is just a movie I love. I think it's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, and also one of the most sort of beautiful. And another thing I love about it, you know, I love horror as a genre in general, but what I feel like Kubrick was able to do was use the horror genre to get at something that would have been difficult to get at otherwise. And I know that that's a thing that I think horror is really good at, and he sort of mastered that in some way that felt very powerful. Like I think I basically think The Shining is a movie about domestic abuse. And you know, I know everybody has their theories. There's a whole movie about all the theories about it. But to my mind, that's what that movie resonates with for me. And so that was, I was hoping to be able to sort of like get some small fraction of that sort of ability to kind of make people think on even some allegorical level, maybe, about community and about selfishness versus altruism and some ideas like that through a genre framework.
Wow, well, Stanley Kubrick and Roman Polanski, those are good influences to have, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't have any pretensions that I reached even 1/10 of that level, but, I feel like you might as well aim high.
Yeah, I like that. I like that attitude. So I was recently in Los Angeles in February, and I had a great time.
Mm-hmm.
But you do see a lot of psychics over here, or I remember going to Hollywood Boulevard and the Oscars was going on, and so the Dolby Theater was all dolled up, and the Chinese theater I went there, and then there's the Jimmy Kimmel show and the Hollywood the stars on the street, the Walk of Fame,
Sure.
but also the Scientologists are there.
Yes, they are.
They've got prime real estate. They've got prime real estate, and I'm just wondering how prominent is maybe not even Scientology, but just kind of strangeness in for certainly from an outsider's perspective. It does seem like there's a lot of people are lonely and isolated, so they turn to things to give them some solace. So how prominent is that in Los Angeles?
Oh, I think it's very prominent, and you definitely picked up on something that was a thread in this for me. Yeah, well, I mean, that was a thing that I really noticed when I moved to Los Angeles is that, as you said, I mean, Scientology is everywhere in Los Angeles. They own massive amounts of real estate, and it's a major sort of part of the city. But as I sort of delved into the history, LA has been for decades a kind of a breeding ground for this kind of, what I guess I call it utopian communities. And I think it's exactly as you said, like people who move to Los Angeles tend to move there alone. They tend to be dreamers or possibly slightly desperate, or both, or dreamers who then become desperate. I certainly have been that in my life. And I think that, that there's such a longing for purpose, for direction, for somebody to tell you belong when you're in that situation. That's at least my best working theory for why Los Angeles seems to be a real incubator for this type of community. And so I got fascinated with the history of the Manson family, which certainly had roots in Los Angeles. And then a major influence on some of the specifics that are in the movie was a guy named Charles Diedrich, who started a group called Synanon, I think in the 60s. And it's a really fascinating, I would encourage anyone who's interested to just look up the Wikipedia page. It's a fascinating organization that began as a drug rehab. With just like the most positive intentions to really try to help people who were in deep trouble. And it was, it became very successful to the point that the government would refer, people who had been caught up in drug stings and so forth to Synanon. And I think there was actually kind of a docudrama made about it and about how it saved people sometime in the 60s. But it sort of curdled into this cult of personality around Diedrich, and it became more and more insular. And they ended up, on a compound, and there were death threats, and people got beaten, and I think there might have even been a murder or two. And it just, to read that and sort of see how something that has such a positive intent and is filled with people who are good people with good intentions, that was just fascinating to me. And so then that certainly was at least kind of a background influence on the writing of this script.
All right. Well, so you've done some work, some shorts, I believe, right? But this is your first, am I correct? This is your first completed feature as a director.
Yes, this is my first feature film.
So I'm sure that's very exciting. And how did it feel, in the editing room or whatever the moment was when it was just like, I'm done? How did that feel, completing your first feature?
I'll tell you, like, the honest answer is it just felt exhausting.
Right.
Because I would say, like, the moment that I felt like it's done was literally a week ago.
Oh, wow.
When we went to Alok Mishra, who's our producer, and I went to the Post House to watch the DCP that we were about to send off to Fantasia. And I had been basically working on this thing full time for over a year since we finished shooting. Between editing and then VFX, sound design, score, color correction, and then doing the DCP. And then, finally, we were right down to the wire. We watched the DCP, with our fingers crossed, hoping there's no problems because there wasn't any time to fix them. And then the next morning, Alok got on a plane with the DCP and brought it to Fantasia Fest.
So that's incredible. Jeez, a week ago.
Yeah, it was,
so you just pooped. It's not this like moment of zen, I guess.
Yeah. So like the next day, I kind of woke up and it was the first day that I had nothing to do. And I just kind of hung out with my wife and son and enjoyed a day for once.
Well, I hope it was a beautiful day. So with everything we're talking about, how did completing this film, or maybe just working on this film, change your outlook on Los Angeles, if it did? Was it kind of like cathartic? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say, in some way, I think when you work through a project like this, you are, especially if it's one that you've written, it is, you are exercising some demon. That was the case for me. It's interesting though, because like the moments of getting to actually feel that catharsis and feel that you're telling the story that you had pent up inside you can be few and far between. It's a really interesting thing. I think like one of the most difficult things about directing that I've found is that it's very difficult to stay focused on the story, on the characters, because there's so much detail to be worked out, and there's so many decisions to be made, and there's so many things going on, and it's really easy to get caught up in the details and the nitty gritty and the technical stuff. And that also is, unfortunately, that is a tendency that my mind has. Like, I like details. I'm a detail-oriented person. I come from a computer science background, so I tend to think technically. And it's real easy, I've found, for me to end up with something that's technically very good and has no heart to it. And so I have to really remind myself to stay focused on the story, to stay focused on the performances, to stay focused on, what are we doing here? Why is it that we need to get this shot just right? So I actually find that I love production. I love production, but it's a real whirlwind, and it's an exhausting thing. And I find that like there's a real sense of that when I really start to feel the story and feel that catharsis you're talking about is in the editing room, is in post, where you can sit with what you have, and there's a kind of freeing feeling of the limitations of you have what you have, right? There's no longer this like rushing around to try to get every piece you can. It's now like you're now the chef in the kitchen with the ingredients. You've got what you've got, and now how do you make your souffle with it or whatever? I'm not a chef, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so that and I was lucky enough to have a few weeks with a really brilliant editor named Rich Fox, who really helped to shape the material. So I was able to then come in and watch a cut and see the story start to take shape. And I think that was the moment when I felt like, yes, like this is the, on some level anyway, the story that I've been trying to tell for however many years now.
All right. Well, David Marmor, thank you for your time and telling me about your freaky little movie, 1BR. May you please tell me what you have planned for the future?
I'm going to take a couple weeks off. That's what I have planned for the immediate future.
All right.
And then I have another script that I'm very excited about, that I'm, hoping to get set up, and, talking with producers and, just it's back to the hustle at this point.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.